Welcome to another edition of Tales from the Attitude Era. I am Rob Pasbani with my co-host, the former head writer of WWE, WWF at the time, Tommy Blacha. Tommy, welcome. It's another episode of the show. We want to remind everyone, please follow us on social media, TFT Attitude Era, Tales from the Attitude
We're begging
Era.
you.
Please.
We're in
Twitter,
the era of
Instagram,
begging you to follow.
TikTok, and of course,
everything.
And if you ever have any questions or feedback or something we say that you'd like some follow-up on, you could always email us tftattitudeera@gmail.com, and we'll answer it on a future show.
Even if you hate us and think we suck, still
we'd love that.
follow
We'd
and
love that.
send hate.
So it's the day after No Mercy. That's the episode of WWE Raw that we are watching right now. You can watch it on Peacock. The date of the episode, it's season 7, episode 42 in the really stupid Peacock indexing, October 18th. And this was from Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio. And drew 10,843 fans, about 1,400 tickets shy of capacity, according to the Wrestling Observer of the time, with a gate of $312,000.
Goodness gracious.
Which is pretty big money for that time.
I wonder what the merch gate was. That just kept going up and up and up through the years. I remember just like, that was one thing I saw, like, oh, foam fingers, some t-shirts, and huge sellout. And then it just kept blowing up. By the time a decade later, you'd just go and see
yeah, I mean, like
championship belts, like kids, like $200, boom, flying out like hotcakes. Crazy.
Before, they would have 5 championship titles on sale at any time. Now there's like 200 because
it's crazy.
The margins must be crazy on those.
I always remember years ago, went to some show somewhere where Tatanka turned heel, and some kid, his dad had bought him a foam tomahawk. And then he turned heel, and then I remember seeing him leave, and the kid's just holding the foam. Oh, I don't want this anymore. He's a bad guy. Like the dad, like, too bad. You got to start liking the bad guys. Yeah, damn it.
So it's the night after No Mercy. And I have to say, a little behind the curtain, we taped our No Mercy episode maybe like 2 weeks ago. So it's completely out of my head what happened at No Mercy. So I really appreciate at the top of the show, the WWF production team, top of the line, caught me up right away as to everything that happened at No Mercy. And of course, because it was a pay-per-view, a lot of people didn't see, 9 out of 10 people watching the show probably did not see the pay-per-view based on just what buy rates are.
True. And that's what was fun back then, because I remember actually this was, I remember my suggestion from back in the day when you'd watch Wild World of Sports or things when they'd have Ali versus, Joe Frazier and all these things that were kind of too big for TV. And you'd see little glimpses, even on the news or whatever. They just show a still shot maybe of, a knockdown or something. So everyone kind of had bated breath, and just those visuals would not come through. Like nowadays, everything is like you see everything all the time. Fine. Even some of the big things are leaked out like that. But I thought like, oh, it's exciting to just show stills. So that way, because at the time I was starting to wonder, like, what's the difference between these pay-per-views and Monday Night Raw? Not a lot in terms of the same explosive matches and stuff. Pay-per-views are more like house shows where the matches could be extended. But in terms of like excitement or whatever, it was always a thing like, why are people paying so much money for pay-per-views when all this stuff there's 5 original hours of programming a week anyway? But hell, they just kept doing it. So that was a thing we'd always have, something that like, oh, let's show you what you missed at the pay-per-view. And it was a way to make it a little more exciting. Like, oh, I got to see that. That's a still image. So I always thought that worked pretty well.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we're all caught up. And I have to say, I noticed with the pace of the show in general, I feel like this, after being there for, what is it now, 2 or 3 weeks, I feel like you finally kind of got a good flow going. Like everyone's pretty comfortable. When you came in, you were in the middle of a pay-per-view cycle. So you had to wrap up all these angles that you didn't necessarily create for No Mercy, but it feels like this is almost like a soft reset. You're not resetting everybody. You know, there's some angles carrying over from the pay-per-view, but it seems like you have far more control of where the story is headed because you are controlling the beats more, and it seems like a much more coherent show.
Well, I'd love to agree with you, but I kind of can't.
Oh, yeah? Okay, go ahead.
Just because, you know, those things go in cycles naturally. And, you know, while that is true, you could look at it from that perspective of like these things were wrapped up from Russo or whatever. But you know what I mean? Generally speaking, the flow and the excitement of everything was still related to, at that time, the numbers, right? It was still a numbers game, and people were like, that would make everyone's like attitude better. That would make, you know, the injuries go away when it'd be like, what are the numbers? Oh, the numbers are going up. So that was a kind of a thing. WCW was going down. WWF was going up. And that really, you know, and everyone was aware of that constantly. And they would kind of like look at the Monday Night Raws. What did WCW do? And like, oh, they're going in the shit. So that whole, I kind of equate it to like a team where the season is ending and then we're going to the playoffs and hey, we got a chance. So that's kind of an overriding thing. I'd love to like say like, yeah, it was the control and the booking and all that, but all that matters like tremendously what happening and whether or not like, you know, everyone's replaceable, whether like the new guys in there helping stuff. And Gewurz is here too. Who are these guys? Most people were kind of like, who are those guys? Oh, those are the new guys. What are we doing? Coming out of a production meeting with agents. So it wasn't exactly as you put it. It was like this whole overwhelming, you know, and every time I bristle because you got to be like, oh my God, but like the contributions from everyone and the agents and the whole machine, you know, is just, you know, I think I just got footing in being a contributor. Put it that way. Mm-hmm. And, you know, so it's not, you know, exactly like how you framed it as much as I'd like to say, yes, that's exactly it. But, you know what I mean? This, you know, this just wave of emotion really was from everyone was like, this is the place to be. This is starting to blow up. This is getting bigger. This is getting bigger, you know?
Yeah. You could certainly feel it. I feel in the, just everyone is on the top of their game on this episode. Yeah. So it kicks off with The Rock coming out. The Rock was injured, hit with the sledgehammer last night by Triple H. He's selling his ribs. And again, the crowd is just so on fire for him. It's basically almost a repeat of last week's promo that he did on the show, but it doesn't matter because he's in front of a new crowd of people and they all want to sing along with every catchphrase. It's fascinating. It's like watching a band at the top of their level with the fans knowing every line to the songs. You know?
Oh, it is. And when it's happening backstage, there's a lot of this, like, holy smokes, this is just continuing to get over, you know, because even sometimes we would talk about like, gosh, there's a pay-per-view and now we've added SmackDown. SmackDown wasn't that old yet, you know, and that's another, you know, it's like, how many hours are people of wrestling going to watch? When is it going to get oversaturated? When are the pay-per-views going to go down because so much stuff is available? And it just wasn't stopping. And then you'd go to these shows and you'd be like, oh my God, they're so over. They're just so into it. And just like, it was amazing.
That's a great point because also this was before they split the rosters. So the storylines just continue on SmackDown. The Rock has to be on Raw and on SmackDown. You know, like all the guys are on all the shows. Right. So you got to keep the stories going for twice as long now almost.
Sure. And when there's a pay-per-view, that's 3 intense days in a row. You can't, you know.
Right.
I mean, and you're in 3 different cities. And you know what I mean? So by the time Tuesday night came around, you're like, what's happening? You know what I mean? You go home like, I can't remember, you know, I can't hardly talk. It's like.
Right. Especially after a week like this.
Yeah, absolutely.
So The Rock comes out. He says he wants the world title. Austin comes out and arguably an even bigger pop than The Rock. It's like, wow, there's someone even more over than The Rock, you know? And he wants the title. Then Vince McMahon comes out and says, oh, we know what you guys want. Well, what does Triple H want? And he calls out Triple H, and very interesting to watch Triple H in this moment. He's right. He's almost like he doesn't have the confidence of what he would have in a few years as the game. He's still finding himself as his character, and also clearly a notch under The Rock and Austin in terms of overness and just placement on the card in fans' eyes, I would say.
Well, that's fine. That's like being a notch under Babe Ruth and Willie Mays. Still can be a Hall of Famer.
But still, the crowd loves to hate him, and McMahon reveals that it's going to be a triple threat, and the crowd loves this partially because of how much Triple H hates it.
Right. And also, let me just interject here for a second, because we'll talk about this. That's why it was so smart, I think, to have Triple H the champion. And Triple H, he did I think he's underrated a bit for the service he did to these guys. Because what was happening is you had forever, babyface heel. The Rock and Austin are arguably, they're tweeners. They're babyfaces who act like heels in a way. So this is kind of interesting. Like, well, how are you going to have what kind of mechanisms will a heel have against these guys? So you had to have someone like Triple H who was like, it was kind of perfect where, you start to have so much charisma, going at each other. You needed him to be like, he should be like a little flat and like, maybe a little whinier. You know what I mean? There was kind of thought to that about how he was. And when you say like he's a little lower, like that kind of worked. It was good. And he kind of knew like, well, his time will come around. He'll push his own buttons to be a bigger individual later. But, there was not, I think it would have been a mistake to come out and like, I'm going to out charisma these guys. It worked, if that made sense.
And also he couldn't. There's no way. There's no way he could have. But, and I think why it works is if Austin or Rock were a champion and the other was gunning for them, that means some of the crowd would be booing either Austin or Rock. But here, they're cheering both of them because they want to see either one of them kick Triple H's ass.
Absolutely, yeah.
It keeps them strong as well. Not to have, they don't need the title right now. They're so over. Like, what does it matter?
It's funny.
The title is getting Triple H over in a way.
Yeah, yeah. And then you want those guys on a trajectory always like that, and that's a classic wrestling thing. Like the person chasing is better, like, oh God, that, if only women gotten a Raw deal, they could get the title. And I love this kind of like triple threat. They weren't so common back then, and I think they kind of got exhausted. And it was funny when we did the Reddit Ask Me Anything. A lot of people I find too, like, oh, why is it always these triple threats and this and that? And I'm like, but you have to remember at the time that was pretty fresh. Like, what? All three? That's interesting. And even I remember like, how are they going to work that match? That'll be fun. You know what I mean? Because you didn't see a lot of that. Then
definitely not in WWF.
Yeah.
This was definitely the first they started doing it, and it was interesting. They called it a triple threat, not like a three-way dance, which other companies would call it.
And also not in a big main event too. There's always all kinds of skagagery with all kinds of stuff, but in a big main event, like I found that interesting. I found that a good call.
I wanted to ask too. This was a 20-minute segment, a signature Raw opening segment for the time. What does the script look like for this? In the sense of you're obviously not scripting all of the Rock's lines. You're not scripting, Austin. Is it just a general outline of essentially how I summarized the segment is what's on the script?
Even less. I would say more like in the production meeting or in the rundown to be like opening, segment. Rock, we throw our videotape, shows what happened at No Mercy. Rock comes out, says, it might be in the outline, or the rundown, like, Rock comes out, wants it. I don't forget exactly what sentence, like, declares he wants the title. Austin will come out this, you just kind of explain what's going to happen. And then McMahon comes out, declares a triple threat, just very basic like that. And then everything is just, as far as, especially with those guys, it wasn't like, that's kind of the downfall, I think, sometimes of wrestling. Wasn't like scripts or lines they were memorizing per se. They all knew like, okay, what we got to get across. And then, Gewurz would be off with the Rock. Like, oh, here's some lines, or here's this, or you might, feed some stuff to the announcers to be like, oh, this might be a good thing to say, or this or that, So you're just helping shape it all. But they all had like bullet points, and they all were so good. And in a way, I think when I look at this, little bit of sometimes the complaint or the downfall of wrestling later was long segments with people with microphones talking to each other, because that's just how the rundowns were. And it was great and it was efficient, but you have to remember, holy fuck, it was The Rock, then Austin, then McMahon. they could hold court and be so compelling with 3 guys in microphones saying, now hold on a second, you're saying this. And when people aren't that good, it just becomes the drizzling shits when you're like, holy fuck, how long is this? You know, and when back then you're like, fucking 20 minutes? 3 guys talking in the ring at each other for 20 fucking minutes? And people are just fucking psyched and we haven't had action yet. And you're just like, wow, these shows are working. And when that isn't working and later, like, what are they talking about? Who cares? Then it becomes like, oh, this is deadly. You know,
yeah,
so
you're totally right. It's a complete, I agree with you. And I even remember at the time watching, like when these segments would happen, I'm tuned into Raw. Like, unless they have Rey Mysterio himself on Nitro, you know, I'm not watching that. I want, like, this is exactly what I want to see as a fan of that moment. Like the 3 top guys, like, roasting each other or whatever they do.
And it would cause sometimes a ripple effect because sometimes it was so over and the crowd was so over. And that was the thing. Bruce Pritchard was always the guy and was a kind of a genius at that. Because when you'd lay this stuff out, he was the guy that like, okay, how much time for this match? How much time for this? You know what I mean? And so you'd never get it right. And then sometimes it would just extend because it was so over or something was happening. So then later, you know, it's like, oh, we got 5 minutes for this match. Oh, fucking talking segment went long. Your match is now 3 minutes. Oh, shit. So everything was like crazy on the fly. But again, since it was so over, people wouldn't really complain that much because it's like, why is my match fucked now? Because, oh, that fucking segment was so great and the numbers are huge. And then they're like, okay, let's, you know, just kind of roll with the punches as opposed to like, when it's the driveling shits and someone's going too long in a mic, you're like, what the fuck? People are tuning out. That sucks. And I got less time. And, you know, that's when all the horrible shit leaks in, you know, but here it was like amazing. I'm always amazed when I'm timing it. I was looking at like, my God, what a chunk of time. And that makes everything more efficient because you're like, you realize we haven't seen any actual in-ring action yet. The crowd's riveted and we're a fucking half hour into the show. It's incredible.
Yeah. We don't see the Hardys and Edge and Christian have the moment of the night before. We don't even see them until an hour and a half into the show. That's how loaded the show is.
Yeah.
You know, like, yeah. And I don't mean that as a negative at all. I'm just like, there's so much going on.
Yeah. And that's another fascinating thing that I would talk about. I think where I got along with Vince was about like TV production and this whole notion. There still is today, like this notion that like, I'm a preliminary or a mid-carder or I'm at the end of the main eventer. It's like, well, it's TV. It's not a card. It's not like that. It doesn't matter where you are on the show. In fact, it's better when like, my God, we got this. And now this, you know, and it's all like a different flavor. So you got these 3 guys talking. Then when you go to the Edge and Christian stuff, like, oh, recap these guys. That's a totally different flavor. These high flyers and these, you know, ladder matches. And it's like, oh, it's like, oh, I'm gonna refresh my palate and go over here and go over here. And as far as like, you know, where your place is at the show or like, you know, sure, the ending is always the main event, but you know, sometimes guys got bogged down with that. Like, you know, oh, where am I in the show? Like, doesn't matter. You know what I mean?
I think now people are with the, you know, the wider knowledge of quarter-hour ratings and things like that. People are less likely to feel that way, you know, just because they know like, oh, I'm in actually what will likely be the highest rated segment of the show or whatever.
Yeah. Well, that's a whole other can of worms for me too, the quarter-hour spikes and how we need to manipulate that. And that kind of can be negative too. Like when everything's rolling good, everything feeds off itself. Cause then you can argue too, like, well, I should have been in the most highly rated thing, but the thing before me was the drizzling shit. So how do people tune back in? And it just gets pretty convoluted. So it matters, but at the same time, when you're producing it, in my opinion, was like, fucking don't think about it because it can really be. That doesn't matter, you know, or it can be just detrimental in how you produce something, you know. And that's when there's an old school phrase in wrestling called hot shotting, which kind of applies to a lot of TV, which means just do whatever in any moment, exhaust whatever you have to make a fabulous moment. Doesn't matter. Pull out all the stops all the time. But at a certain point, like, well, then you exhaust everything. It's kind of like, I think it was Steven Spielberg or someone said it's interesting, like, action kills suspense. You know what I mean? So it's like if you build suspense, is once you have action, then it starts to eat away at the suspense you've built. So you can't like, so, you know, even TNA, total nonstop action, even that name, but like, well, that's boring. total not, you know, the notion that anything can happen at any time at a certain point becomes, well, what does it matter then? Everything's happening at all the time. It's, you know,
right. Yeah.
I'm bored.
Well, this is Russoism is, you know, like if every match has a run in and every match has like a goofy ending, then that doesn't mean as much. Then, you know, then the endings are wasteful.
Yeah. There's diminishing returns.
Yeah. So we have X-Pac and Kane now on the same page after the pay-per-view, taking on the Dudleys. The Dudleys very early on in their run. I think they just got to WWF like a few weeks prior because Bubba is still doing his stuttering gimmick. What's so interesting is this was something I would notice in WWF is when characters would come in from a different promotion and those characters had an evolution in the promotion, sometimes they would revert the character to the older version of the character and have that evolution again in WWF because Bubba was a stutterer in ECW when they were more of like a mid-card comedy act, but then they became a main event act and he just became a full-on asshole heel and with no stutter, just total serious, I'm going to kill you heel. They come to WWF, they're back in the mid-card, so they're doing the stuttering thing. Now, absolutely 100%, no chance in hell would they do this angle nowadays. But I loved the stutter at the time. You know, I see how it's insensitive, as many things that we've been watching are.
Which is hilarious to even think of, like the insensitivity of wrestling. You know what I mean? Oh, you mean the pro wrestling when Sergeant Slaughter gave up on his own country during the, you know, I mean, how many examples do you have? Like isn't that the beauty of wrestling?
Right.
And that all goes to the kayfabe. When kayfabe was still alive, you could always say like, it's deplorable. And not only that, they beat him up. That's why you should root for him, you know, and that whole
he's going to get his.
Yeah.
But now the heat is on the company, not the wrestler. They just know.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I love the stutter. Also, of course, another thing is there's a lot of rebel flags on the show. I know that, you know, Bubba's wearing a do-rag with a rebel flag, but Bossman has a rebel flag tattoo. Another thing you probably would not be seeing on television nowadays, unless it's a Freebird retrospective.
It's a can of worms. Cause you know, like I was telling you the other day, like, you know, like, hey, there was a, whatever, the Dukes of Hazzard, or I had a denim jacket with all these patches on it, like, you know, baseball patches, and there was a Confederate flag patch, but it wasn't like certainly didn't have a Nazi ethos or, you know,
exactly.
As a kid, it's just like, oh, it's just like, you know, a thing that it means the South, you know what I mean? So right or wrong, you know, so it's hard to look back and, you know, you certainly, because, you know, Bubba wore one as a do-rag. It's not like now I'm going to really, you know,
meanwhile,
be
his pro-slavery.
You know what I mean? It's
exactly.
like, you know, so.
It meant something different in that moment to some people, in the sense that it was just like, I'm a tough guy, you know, like that's it. But so one thing also that was interesting about this match is X-Pac comes out with an energy drink, Hansen's energy drink, which is the precursor. It's the company that would become Monster Energy Drink. And this was one of the first endorsements of the Attitude Era, I feel. And it works so well with the green and everything.
Yeah, well, that was the excitement of what was happening too. Like, here's a little extra money. Here, do this. And in fact, I remember. I think was it this one, but maybe it was a pay-per-view. There was brought to you by Lugs. There was a lot of like stuff filtering in, and I remember having Lugs forever because there was all this fun stuff that was happening. Like, I don't know if it was this show, some show. You go backstage and Lugs, the company that was like a big shoe company, I don't think they're around anymore, had a big like mobile home or like a big huge RV, like a 6-wheel RV with a wrap on it said Lugs, and they had just like all their representatives in this one section, and they just said like, and they had all these massive sized lugs. So like anyone could go by backstage, like wrestlers and crew, like, you want some lugs? And then, what size are you? So it was every time you looked like, hey, where is so-and-so for this segment? Oh, they're getting their lugs. And then like, just because they wanted like, you know, which was smart. And all the wrestlers, if you've noticed in subsequent weeks, are always all wearing lugs. Cause like, who doesn't want just like, come on in. What's, you know, wow, you got a size 15? We sure do. This or that. All right,
wrestlers
thanks. Here you
love free shit. Love free shit.
Human beings love. Yeah,
well,
don't put that on wrestlers.
But I
had a pair of lugs.
Yeah. Well, the reason I say this is I always would recall watching Greg Valentine or whatever shoot interview, and he's wearing like WWF Euro Tour, 1998 or so. They all have these tour shirts or like these WWE 2K3.
You got to remember they're independent contractors in that sense for the most part back then, and so they're taking care of their own travel, you know what I mean? So it's so funny. So a lot of these guys, if you wanted to meet them, would be like at the shittiest Motel 6 because they're kind of being like, well, I'm going out of this town, I'm just grabbing some sleep before I go to the next town, and I pay for everything myself. So it's kind of like, oh, like these top superstars, and like, what, 3 of them are shacking up in the shitty Motel 6? Like, yeah, we're just gonna sleep for 5 hours. Why are we going to get a hotel and what have you? So there's a lot of that. So yeah, free stuff, So that was like, the wrestler uniform was like sweatpants, free T-shirt, fanny pack. That was it.
Yeah. And so X-Pac and Kane, obviously the bigger talent package at the moment. So they go over, but Dudleys are protected here. The Headbangers come out. I love the Headbangers, great mid-card act. And they're distracting the Dudleys. They're starting a new program here. And so they distract Bubba. And that's how Kane and X-Pac get the win. And afterwards, the Dudleys and the Headbangers get into a brawl. So you even forget that the Dudleys lost. They're too busy beating up the Headbangers.
As JR would say, good piece of business. Everyone like, okay, they win, they're off. They lose, but they're more pissed off at the Headbangers. And like I said, that's always the philosophy of like, if you're not going for the title or you're on the way to it, or challenging for it, you got to be involved in some kind of feud. Why? And it can be as simple as like, oh, those guys came out and made fun of him and they hate him. It
there has to be a grudge.
Yeah,
right.
There you go. And
then we see the first of multiple backstage segments with Mr. Hughes, who I'm surprised is still around, probably not for too long, playing poker with the Acolytes. They're not the APA yet. And Mr. Hughes is seconded by Howard Finkel. And so this is just the first shot of it. Just they're playing poker, and this goes on throughout the night. I love how it escalates as we move forward in the night.
Yeah, it's funny. Sometimes you watch things like that, and it almost the perspective is like, "What's Mr. Hughes doing there?" Like, well, at the time, you're always looking to enhance the shows, build things, start things. So, and something happens live. There may have been an incredible weird moment that happened between Finkel and Hughes, and they would have been completely over and gone. And I don't know the specifics of how Mr. Hughes left or whatever, but everyone's a capable worker, big, you know what I mean? So sometimes I always feel bad. Like it's a disservice to be like, what is he doing in this show? Well, that's a mistake. Like, well, not exactly. You have to, always, remember that. So,
he had his role.
Yeah.
And then we have Big Boss Man coming out to challenge the Big Show for a match for the hardcore title. And this is really where you see Big Boss Man's strength and his position on the card. He is an upper mid-carder there to help other upper mid-carders on their way up the ladder. Like he is there to get Big Show over.
One of my favorite guys, Ray Traylor. And I think what people don't, rest in peace. What a funny, great guy. Just a sweetheart, and he was a guy that I think people may not realize, like, oh, he had that brawling style or whatever, but he was a guy, he worked main matches with Hogan back in the day. He was always, you could plug and play. It's like, he'll work with anyone. His style will work with anyone. Mm-hmm. He was just such an underrated performer because he never, was one of those guys that like, I don't know. Did he ever have like a big push? But he was just so stable, and he was big and just great. Like,
and he would get the crowd to react. I feel too. They always hated him or loved him if he was playing the face.
And what was funny about this is because a lot of this would be like, and this kind of came from the Big Show. Like actually, it was one of those things where Vince like, the Big Show doesn't mind that we make fun of his dad was a wrestling fan, doesn't make fun of his father's demise and all this stuff because his
dad's already dead.
Yeah. So this was kind of the marching orders that came from him. It wasn't anything that like, we're going to make fun of your dead dad. Well, I don't know. I feel like that. He was all for it as, based a lot in his dad knowing, man, be successful in the business and what have you. And so, we gave it to the boss man, and sometimes the boss man would call up, like I would get a call, man, hey man, I love what you're doing, man. This is just to be like that guy who's like, man, I'm so vicious. They really hate me. But like behind the scenes, like, oh, this is so good. This is good for me. Thank you. Just like a sweet guy who's like appreciative. And then because he gets to go out there and just be such a shitheel and the stuff he's saying, and even when you give him something good, like you should say something like that, how he's, whatever, all those lines, like, dad's not worth anything, and he'd just giggle like, oh, that's gonna be good, just a funny contrast to be like this really kind of like happy-go-lucky sweet guy to be like, oh, they're gonna hate me. Incredible.
We have the Hollies backstage with Vince saying that there's a pair of super heavyweights and that they deserve a title shot, and Vince grants them the shot at the Rock and Sock Connection. Yep. Which leads to a great match. Then my favorite segment of the night, we have the fabulous Moola with Mae Young, and of course we just did a special on how much we love Mae Young, and I cannot tell you how hard I laughed at this segment when Mae Young is like roasting Moola, and Moola's trying to be all demure and a lady, and finally Mae Young asks her or challenges her for a match for a shot at the women's title. And Moola turns to Michael Cole, who's doing the interview, and she says, Michael, will you hold this belt while I answer this question? So nice and calm. And then lands the stiffest Minoru Suzuki forearm shot. I bursted out laughing at this shot. And Mae Young takes a legit bump right here. She falls right back. There's no half-assed.
Well, you see that match too. It's like that is the basis of it, that old school, like, laying in the forearms like Harley Race or something. And then you also see like Mae Young's got that like weathered World War II era forearm tattoo, and she's laying it in. If you had the picture, it'd be like, oh, is that my uncle? Like, what's that? And they're like, and those broad backs, and you're just like, it's like, so it's like, oh, these women have been laying it in since before this whole crowd was born.
Yeah, you're right. Oh my God.
If you were to say like who was born by the time these two had their first match, there'd be like 7 people in there. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, so I'm very excited to watch this match on SmackDown. This is such great booking. Also just because they've been friends this whole time, and they've been on the same team, and finally the jealousy of the women's championship. It's like The Ring and Lord of the Rings. It just gets into people.
I can't remember how it came about. Like a lot of things are just discussions or something like, oh, where do we go with this? Like and like, I can't, someone like, well, why don't, it seem like a no-brainer. Like, why don't those two have a match? Oh, should we exhaust that? And I think, if I remember correctly, I think I made the joke or something. It's like, should we exhaust that? And I'm like, well, I wouldn't wait too long. Just based on, oh, that's rude. Well, we better, but you got a point. But just like, oh, that's one of those fun things like that. You're also like, it's like things to do. Are you going to worry about that match? Like, worry about that match. They've got 100 years of experience.
Yeah, exactly.
And I can't remember who the agent was. Like, so funny. Like, and the agent for that'll be Lonzo or Pat Patterson. Like, my God, like, it's gonna be fine. And also, they had that ethos. They had to be fine. They weren't gonna, let it not be great. No matter that they're in their late 70s. And just
this is their first shot in over a decade. They're gonna make it work.
Yeah. And the crowd's going to be, and it's just such a contrast to be like, holy smokes, look at,
it's a freak show. I mean, it's two old ladies beating the shit out of each other.
It is, but what isn't, I mean,
well, all of wrestling. Yeah. No, it's such a great added flavor to the variety show.
Yeah. Because it's not just like hauling, two old ladies out there. It's two artists with multiple decades of craft honing under their belts.
Well, yeah, I'm very excited for SmackDown now. Then we have another sexual chocolate segment Here he is with his fourth sex therapist, who is an older white lady. And Dave Meltzer in the recap on the Wrestling Observer described her as looking like Janet Reno, which I did not see at all. But this woman, the gag of the bit is this woman throws herself at Mark Henry, and she's the one who wants Mark Henry. So his sex therapy problems continue.
Yes, it does. And just, that whole thing, just the name Sexual Chocolate still cracks me up. It's such a clunky non-name that just works so well for me. I don't know, what is your name? Sexual Chocolate. I'm still cracking up at it.
Then we have Godfather versus Visera, continuing that program, and Visera is still affiliated with Midian. Quick match. I'm guessing if time had to be cut, it was probably from this match, because not much happened here. Midian distracts Godfather. Visera wins with a splash. The Hoes resuscitate Godfather. I will say the local strip clubs definitely had some top talent, because the train this week was very well trained. Let's say
some things are never in short supply. Put it that way. Yeah, and this was one of those at matches where everyone's happy to do, and it's just like it's just a crowd pleaser. It's like what's for dessert? Oh, those ice cream sundae.
The crowd was crazy for that entrance.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and then and Visera too. Just Visera alone. My goodness, he's just like worth the price of admission to see him walk in. Kind of nothing like being on a flight with Visera. It's so funny. I would like to try to get on the plane first to just to see, as everyone's like putting their stuff up, and when he comes in and fills that cabin up there, and at the time he had metal caps on his teeth, and often would wear like these, white contact lenses, so his eyes were white, and he had like a white mohawk, and he would just get on the plane and he'd just fill up that cabin. Like everyone would just like putting up their luggage would just stop and like, what the fuck? And he'd just come down the aisle. And I can't imagine nowadays with the plane, like the seats, like how could you even, he'd have to turn sideways to walk down the aisle, which I think he did then too. It was just like, holy smokes, look at this guy.
Imagine having the middle seat next to Visera. That can't be fun.
Yeah. Just like, which reminds me, I'll tell you a good, which always made me like Billy Gunn so much. What a natural heel. I was on a flight once, and back then it was a short flight. I can't remember where, but it wasn't assigned seating. It's kind of like first come, first serve. And then there's an exit row. And so the exit row was longer seats, right? Or more leg room, much more. And then he came on, and there was like this Conan Nebushi like guy, like, oh, I got this seat. And Billy Gunn came behind me. He goes, hey, I got to have that seat. And the guy's like, excuse me? And he goes, I need that seat. And the guy's like, what? And then he just said this. He goes, come on, look at me. I got that's what and the guy like, just got his stuff. And then he was like looking for a seat and all clogged in the aisle. And he just sat down. I was just like, a fucking guy's just a natural heel. That was the fucking incredible. Oh, why do you need this seat? Look at me. Oh, okay. It was fucking amazing.
And then, so then we get back to the poker segment. Hughes is a little more agitated. He demands that Fink get his spit cup and hocks a loogie, and then loses another hand in poker. All building up here. Backstage segment with Mick Foley looking for The Rock. What a Emmy award nominating performance this week was for Mick Foley all throughout the show. Yeah. Unbelievable range. The Rock is focused on this world title match. Foley reminds him that they have a tag match tonight, and The Rock surprisingly says that he does not care about the tag team titles. I'm surprised WWE would knock their own championship like that, but he then quickly adjusts, saying he's too focused on the world title right now to care about it.
Right.
And then Mick Foley hands him an advanced copy of his book, Have a Nice Day, and The Rock, being a professional, does not do anything near burying the book. Like he only compliments, because obviously this is a big deal for WWE. This is their first big book. Nobody wants that to be knocked. Right. And Foley gives him an early copy of the book, said he signed it, and if he needs a bookmark, he reclaimed Rocco, and he has him in his shirt pocket. And The Rock says that he could just keep Rocco. We don't need that. And this is a great setup for what happens later on.
And all this stuff, boy, it could, if it weren't for those guys, this incredible contrast of The Rock with, this fucking hyper slobbish, insane Goofy with his, which I think I never asked him, but I think, that way of talking is like, I think it's based on the guy who played Charles Manson, Steve Railsback. And so he's like, that weird voice crackling stuff.
Yeah.
When you lay it out, boy, that could be the drizzling shits to be like, oh, and then the bookmark, and then Rocco, and then he finds the book in the trash, and he's mad. To lay that out on paper, if it weren't for those guys, where like, oh, they'll make it work because it's Foley and The Rock. I can see that like just being like, what? Who gives a fuck? His book? What? But just like I said, Foley's so good. He's just so good. He's one of the absolute greatest because he can go from I'm funny, I'm gaga, I'm a fool, I'm ridiculous, I lose, I'm pissed, I'm insane, here's heat, I'm gonna, what I mean? Like, just ebb and flow all the time. And it's kind of remarkable, it's not everyone could do that or come close to that.
We have Chyna coming out with her new Intercontinental title and her new second, Miss Kitty, who is dressed as a mini Chyna.
Mm-hmm.
And they look great together.
Mm-hmm.
And Chyna says she's honored to be the first female Intercontinental Champion. Truly a huge honor. And I don't believe any other woman has held the IC. I don't think Beth Phoenix held the IC. I believe she's the only one. And that she said she was going to be a defending champion. And if anybody has the balls, come out and face her now. And then Chris Jericho comes out, does an amazing job doing the misogynist gimmick.
Yep.
Basically, he's being the avatar for like internet nerds or like these classic wrestling fans about like, this is an embarrassment to all the great champions. Sure. And I love the great champions that he listed: Ricky Steamboat, Randy Savage, Rick Rude, the Mountie.
yeah.
Which is great.
That was a good one.
And essentially challenges her to a match, which she accepts.
Yep.
And I feel this angle in general is a real big test for Jericho because he really does have to carry the workload here. And it's an angle that some might see as embarrassing, kind of like the truth. There is truth to his promo because there were guys from what I've read that didn't want to work with Chyna because they didn't want to sell for a girl.
Yeah. But Jericho's not dumb. And that's, frankly, that's dumb. Because and like I said, he was the pro, and he's gonna like make it all work. But I remember at the time that was, boy, it would be a little different now to be like, it just was so groundbreaking and just aesthetically to look at her, and it was over, and she was huge, and it was like such a good. What was I thought worked great was like this was just such a side thing that was so good. That was like, well, that's compelling, and that's a championship, and that's different. And again, fucking hey, it's pro wrestling. Yeah, of course, be controversial, spin it. So I can't think, sell for a girl. Like, look at some of the all-time greats like Scott Hall and Nash. Those guys, like. You see him lose 20 times on TV. It's not about that, you know what I mean? Selling and, and then they just protect themselves by being great. Jericho too, you know what I mean? A lot of it's not about like, man, if I lose, what's going to make me look bad? Like, no, that's not your worth really. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and especially Jericho had to come out of like, sometimes he was like straight gaga with Ralphie and things like that. But, he had that background in Japan. So he just put it all together. He's just so smart to be like, oh, I can, excel in any point that you want me to and be that versatile and that subsequently look, oh, he's got a multi-decade career as a main eventer. That's extremely rare and extremely difficult. So,
yeah. And he's still one of the top guys.
Even when Jericho went to Japan recently, when finally it's like, okay, he's getting older. So he had to go do this new, like a few years ago, I'm sure you're familiar with this. he had to be like, okay, I'm nuts. Now I'm nuts. You know what I mean? And I'll be a heel and I'll put that weird makeup on and put, you know what I mean? It's a little always like reinventing himself. But now he's like, oh, I've got to be a little more like just insane. I can't be just that slick guy because, you know, let's face it, I'm, you know, 50 and and these New Japan guys are like, you know, Kenny Omega. I can't fly around exactly like that. So let me put a little twist in there where like, I'm insane. You know, it's just so smart. You know, you gotta do things like that. Like Ric Flair, dirtiest player in the game as he aged, you know, and got successful in his 50s. Like, oh, I'm so dirty in my mind. You know what I mean? Because let's face it, you can't be like 30 years. It's going to be a difference between the 30-year-old you and the 50-year-old you.
Yeah, you absolutely have to, because also you just don't have the stamina. You can't.
Right.
Got to evolve your style. So we have Test versus the British Bulldog in a street fight. Completely forgot that the Mean Street Posse are affiliated with the Bulldog, but that's what ends the match. It's the Posse interferes. They all jump Test, and Bulldog gets the win here, continuing the program.
And that's a case of like just being efficient and using all parts of the buffalo, so to speak. Like, utilizing the roster and like, why not? You know, and ultimately there was like, well, there's Stephanie and the Greenwich Connection and Shane, and well, that goes away. You know what I mean? But all these things are at play, so and you never know. Like sometimes decisions are often made at like what happens. Like, oh, if something happens explosively, great live and what have you, the storyline grows or it shuts down. That's just the nature of the beast.
We see Al Snow backstage, and Al Snow is, of course, I love the levels to this, how like The Rock is the cool one, Mick Foley is like his hanger-on, but then the relationship with Mick Foley and Al Snow is that Foley is the cool one and Al Snow is the hanger-on. And Al Snow is just lingering backstage, and he finds Mick Foley's book in the trash, the implication being that The Rock threw it in there. And he's blown away by this. And after the commercial break, he finds Foley. He tells Foley's like, oh, stop joking around. You know, this isn't funny. And Al Snow's completely serious. Like, I'm not joking. Like, this is what I saw. And it's a complete change of character for Mick Foley. And it's so wonderful to watch. And like, we almost take for granted how great Mick Foley was, because he's so believable.
Boy, I certainly didn't, because I knew like there was like things that were like I said, like, oh, this could be the drizzling shits. Oh, it's Foley, it won't be. And then he's like, it's just like, I remember talking with him too about like, it's like those old any kind of like old movie or something where like, you know, the shitty outcast finally is like gets shit on so much that they're like, yeah, well, fuck you. You know what I mean? It's like, suddenly you're like, oh, now I feel bad. You know, the kid, he can just turn that on like that. Like, right. I think I'm nothing. What this means to me, you know, and like.
And I think it was so let's jump ahead a segment. So then Foley confronts The Rock.
Right.
And he's like, how could you? You know, like, and it's a complete change of character, because Foley is constantly trying to win The Rock over and be like, we're friends.
Right.
But this is a step too far for Foley. Right. And he's like, how could you do this to me? This means so much to me. I've like, he turns around every nice thing that he did to The Rock, being like, you know, I've given you all this leeway and you can't even show me this respect. And another reason that this worked, beyond Foley's excellent performance, is that The Rock sold for Mick Foley. He's selling this as like, whoa, I've never seen this side of you. I always take you for granted, but it looks like you're really hurt. And it kind of helped that The Rock could see why Foley was hurt by this, while also you kind of get the sense that it wasn't The Rock that threw out the book, based on how the story is going.
No, it's funny. It is like those old like teen movies or something where like, okay, this is, if you're going to be a heel or a complete sociopath, here's the moment where like, I don't give a shit about you, whatever, because he's so distraught. You're kind of like, well, I fucking think your antics are ridiculous and I don't give a shit, but you're really hurting. You know what I mean? It's kind of
like chill out.
Yeah. And it kind of makes it's like, oh, he's the Rock's a tweener, because you don't want to like, you know, make it too formatted where he's just like, oh, he's just, you know, straight heel, you know, and actually, dare I say, bring some levels into the characters, which is so funny because it's pro wrestling, but also that's Mick Foley's so good at a certain point. You're like, he's got his that shitty shirt on. He's just such a mess, and he's got that Mankind. It's just such a convoluted mess, but he's so intense and emotional. Just like, wow, he's really hurting. And then like, wait, what am I seeing? Like, what? Wait, what is he?
Yeah.
Well, he's kind of got a remnant of sort of Cactus Jack Brown tights, but that shitty shirt with the tie because he's an executive, but that's over. That doesn't matter anymore because he's Sacco, but it's the man. What a mess, but it all works, because it's him. It's kind of funny when you look back, like now if you had to explain to someone like, what's his gimmick? What's his get up? Well, to explain all that, someone would be like, what? Never mind. Just enjoy it.
Yeah. Just go with it.
Yeah.
So back in the ring, Val Venis cuts her promo. He lost to Mick Foley the night before to Mankind. So this segment, I feel, was designed to help Val get his heat back. And he, I think he challenges Mick Foley, but Al Snow comes out. And I will say, they had an expertly worked wrestling match. They were doing wrestling moves. They were shooting on each other. They were doing toe hold, blah, blah, blah. The crowd did not care. They were not here to watch Val Venis and Al Snow have a wrestling match.
Yeah, it was one of the difficulties of just that time too, where you're like, boy, you're running on all cylinders for so long that finally, it's like, okay,
yeah,
you can't predict or you can't, and it's just it's a weird thing about establishing characters and putting them forth sometimes, because both those guys can fucking work like mad,
Yeah.
And highly underrated. And I often like sometimes tell like developmental guys, it's weird. Like, it isn't Austin's like glass break song that made him over. Look at the very first, it's fascinating to look at Austin when first he was the ringmaster and he came out. You have the same kind of look in the audience, like, oh, I think that's the guy from WCW, wasn't he? Stunning, so right, yeah, whatever. And then some of those early, psh, it's like, oh, okay, what's this gonna be? And it's almost surreal now to look at it, like, why isn't everyone subsequent, 2 years later, just hear that glass breaking? People are like Pavlov's dogs are in the third fucking deck, just like, oh, they have to turn, and just like, it's just like that response, and it's like, oh, it was established and built on him and this. And it
takes time.
It's fascinating. It takes time. And sometimes it doesn't take time. It takes moments, whether they be time or not, so it's right. It's like a hit song. It's like, oh yeah, you want every song to be a hit song. Fuck, some aren't. And how do we, and capitalizing. And so it's all fascinating, but, yeah.
So then we have the hardcore match with Big Boss Man. And as he comes out backstage, a police officer approaches the Big Show. And we are led to believe that he tells the Big Show that his father died. And Big Show is so distraught, showing real emotion here, showing that he's soft. No. But he cries and he can't. He leaves the building. So Show, Boss Man wins the match. Later on in the show, we see your least favorite plot device, GTV, revealing that Big Boss Man paid off this actor, or paid off, like, he could be a real cop, to tell the Big Show that his father died.
Well, it wasn't my least favorite device. It just, like we were talking before, how it just became weirdly obsolete. It was just one of those things at the pace of things, like, just, and sometimes it's smart. Don't explain why it went away. It just went away. You know what I mean? It just went, that motivated or unmotivated camera, like with like Mark Henry's therapist, things like, why is there a camera there? It doesn't, don't explain it. The more you explain it, the more clunky it is. Fuck it. And it works to this day. So, but yeah. So, and great piece of business when you're moving forward, you're thinking like, we got the championship, we're going for that. We got another championship here. We got the Hardys and Edge and Christian. They're all into each other's shit, but we got like the Hollies, they're a champ. You know what I mean? You're servicing everyone, and everyone's like kind of coming out of it not so bad, or with heat. And then often with the Big Show, I think the difficulty with his career sometimes is like, why isn't that guy the champion? He's fucking 420, you know what I mean? And like, so it's good to keep him hot and emotional and on a side thing, so
and give him depth, give his character a little more depth.
Yeah, absolutely.
So then we have the payoff of the APA angle. So earlier in the night, the final segment of the APA poker match with Mr. Hughes is now without his shirt. He has nothing left to gamble. Right. And so the acolytes are like, well, what about your bitch? Which I'm so surprised the language that's being used here. Yeah. And he's like, my bitch? Yeah, your bitch. And he's pointing at Howard Finkel. And he's like, all right. So then they throw the Fink on the table. And of course, Mr. Hughes loses. And so acolytes now own the Fink.
Love it. Yeah.
A little trafficking backstage.
In fact, I think there may have been something like that as Vince was doing the rundown. You know, he would be like, and now it was segment whatever. We go back to the APA. Mr. Hughes has lost everything, and now, you know, the acolytes own Howard Finkel. You know, exactly. Yeah.
So then APA come out with Fink. Fink has an amazing early acolyte shirt. On the front it says Hell's Henchman, and on the back it says Don't Hunt the Hunter. Looks so metal. I love it.
And I love too that I think that was getting to a certain point where like even like the acolytes, that doesn't make sense. Like, what is an acolyte? Well, acolyte's a believer and a follower, which those guys ultimately are not at all when they become the APA. If anything, they're independent non-followers of everyone, but you still keep what's APA? Acolytes protect. Well, fuck it, doesn't matter. And then what about those weird symbols? Well, that was the ministry. Okay, fuck it, they're gone. You know what I mean? That's just like rolling with shit. Like I said, that is an important thing of like, do we explain that? Like, no, we don't. The pace is just like, it's gone.
It's for the best.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this match was very interesting. So it was Acolytes versus the New H Outlaws. It's interesting because the first spot of the match, Farouk throws Billy Gunn into the ropes. The ropes bust. The top rope busts. Yeah. And Billy Gunn immediately falls just as a natural reaction. And Farouk, being the pro, what do you do when a guy falls? You go for a pinfall right away. Yeah. Like he didn't even flinch. Then they kind of like didn't know what to do, so they just redid the spot, and Billy Gunn gingerly hits the ropes, but then hits an incredible standing dropkick, and eventually the top turnbuckle completely comes down, and they only have two ropes to work with, and it's a bit of a mess.
It's an incredible mess. But
yeah, I mean, they make it. They somehow get to the finish. The finish is the Fink throws a chair into the ring and then goes on the other side to try to distract the ref, but then the Outlaws get the chair and use it on Farouk. Use it on Bradshaw. I'm sorry. And so Fink causes the Acolytes to lose.
Right.
Now, what do you remember backstage watching this whole thing fall apart?
Well, that it was spectacular, and there was never a sense of like, those guys are all so fucking good, right? And it's like fucking Ron Simmons and Billy Gunn, dear Lord, So there never was a sense of like, oh God, this is going bad. Oh boy, it was like, holy smokes. Oh, the ring busted, which is always exciting. And it's real. And then Billy Gunn gets gashed the hard way. That's all real. He's bleeding, right? I mean, it's like, whoa. In fact, something very interesting happened on the way out of that because he's bleeding. And Vince always said, someone's really injured or bleeding or something, get a camera in on him and get something, just to have. So he, after, and they're all kind of on a high, and everyone's very appreciative when they come out like, holy smokes, you pulled that off when the ring busted. It's not like, oh, it's a fuck up. It was more like, whoa, you guys are great. That's something. Well, and they came out of it kind of like always like, oh, incredible. We made it like, because it was a seamless looking match. None of that broken ring made the match clunky. If anything, you could argue it became a much more, if that match would have gone exactly how it should have, we probably wouldn't be talking about it with this much reverence. So when they came off, I remember, there's always like, not a medical team, but there's a medic and something. And he's like, so Billy Gunn's off there like bleeding and, and as he's like, oh, wow, you're all right. And all this, that, and the other. And the one trainer's back there. And I was kind of like, get a camera crew. Okay, we get a camera crew. And I was still kind of, I was new. So I haven't like specifically absolutely met everyone, or I've met them. I haven't like, had that many conversations. This Billy Gunn who's intimidating too. I was like, we should get a camera in on there. And he's like, and he kind of looked at me all bloody. And I was like, oh boy, this might be like, I'm like, what the fuck? And then I said, I remember like, well, Vince said always like, get a camera on someone if there's injury or something, because it could lead into the smart thing I said was like, could lead into more heat and something in the future that's, which always means like, oh, more airtime, more. So he's like, but I remember he's like, and then true Billy Gunn fashion, he was with the trainer, like, get out of here. Like he immediately turns on him, like, get the fuck out of here. What do you, like, don't wipe the blood yet. Let the blood sit a little. So, and I never knew what happened to that footage and nothing came out of it, but he was just like,
well, there was a segment during the tag title match where he's getting stitched up watching the match. Right.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So that was from that. There you go.
Yeah.
There was, I guess, there was some verbiage or some other stuff that said like, how about you say this or that? And it was like clunky, whatever, but we got it. So nonetheless, that was like, always a decree of Vince saying, remember, if you got a leg going the wrong way, get it on tape. Tremendous match. So anyways, I just wanted
it was great.
That was exciting. Great. And that was like, wow. And then that was one of those things where like, holy fuck, these guys are impressive. You know what I mean? They busted the ring.
Yeah, they're so big. Well, Billy Gunn is like almost 300 pounds himself, 6'5".
Well, I think he's like, he's a mere like 6'5", of chiseled 265.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Whatever.
There's big guys in the ring.
And fast and explosive.
That drop kick that he did, I couldn't believe it. Like with no momentum, and he got so high.
Yeah, he's spectacular.
So we have the Hardys come out, and this time I'm like, wow, like there's been so much show, and I completely forgot about the Hardys until right now, and they had the moment that everyone was talking about the night before, and the crowd shows them a lot of respect. Yeah. It's so awesome to watch this back now, like seeing where all of these guys' careers went, and how like this was the moment that the first moment that the crowd finally accepted all four guys. And Terry comes out with Gangrel, and Gangrel reveals he's the only one that actually scored last night because he slept with Terry, which leads to all four of them attacking Gangrel. How dare you? We wanted to sleep with Terry or whatever. But then Terry still leaves with the Hardys because they won the Invitational. So I guess this was just a way to turn the Hardys face, Edge and Christian already face, and kind of disassociate them from Gangrel, who gets the short end of the stick, unfortunately.
Yes. Exactly right.
And then we have the main event. This was such a great segment. The Rock comes out first, huge pop, titles. Mick Foley comes out, not even wearing his mask, completely dejected, like his father died, and sits on the stairs the entire match. Doesn't even get on the apron to get a tag. So good. Hollies come out. They're listed at allegedly 800 pounds, which I loved.
Yeah.
And the whole match is the Rock selling for the Hollies, as he should. It's a 2-on-1 situation.
Right.
And what great sympathy. Like, the crowd loves the Rock, but the crowd also loves Mick Foley. Like, here's the thing. I feel like if it wasn't Mick Foley, the crowd would be booing the Mick Foley character for not helping the Rock. You know what I mean? Like because everyone loves the Rock, but because I feel like the audience loves Mick Foley more. Like, The Rock is more over, but the crowd loves Mick Foley. Like, he's purer to the fans. So it worked so well that you wanted Mick Foley to like snap out of it and help. And like, there was even a moment during the match where he actually turns around and looks at what's going on in the ring. And you're like, oh, is this going to be it?
Yeah, it was interesting. And then you get that's when it all works so well. Cause like the Hollies are protected in the sense that like, oh, they're kicking ass, but and you could argue that like, oh, we kind of look the worst, but we're kicking ass, so everyone's serviced and everyone's happy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And The Rock is, that's always the trick. It's like The Rock can come out like, oh my god, I got my ass kicked and just sold, and like, but my character's not diminished because how could I? Yeah, fight two guys and what have you.
Well, The Rock could have pulled the Hulk Hogan and still beaten the Hollies, 2-on-1. He could have still said, "Oh no, I'm going over," but he didn't. And you still gave The Rock an out because he somehow managed to throw Crash out of the ring and give Hardcore Bob Holly a rock bottom, and you're almost like, whoa, he could win this. Mm-hmm. Only for Triple H to come in, cost him the match. Mick Foley sees this, refuses to help. Rock and Sock lose the tag team titles. No, it's over. It's over because of this misunderstanding, and the Hollies win. So to the point, I made a point a few episodes ago. Why did the Hollies cost the New Age Outlaws the tag team titles? In the end, it worked out for the Hollies because they won the titles. So they the storyline correct, like fixes any perceived plot holes, which there were. I'm not saying it was one. It was
sure.
Obviously,
well, there always is tons of them.
Yeah.
And to speak to that, this is just a case of like a lot of the same things can go on with different performers or things that, you know, it's not always like matching things up in the writing. It's like these guys are so good that these storylines end up working. They're all convoluted and like terrible, you know, in that sense. But you can see like, oh, that could have just been. It's always like that. That could have been the shits with, you know, inferior talent going like, what? There's a book and then this guy and oh, he's here. What the fuck? Who cares? You know what I mean? But this all like, you know, it all like worked because it's like, oh, that segment with Triple H, you know, before when he was, you know, oh. Right. And now this is a callback to that because the segments were memorable. When the segments are the shits and you're building something later from something that like hardly worked, then the callback becomes like, you know, as opposed to. That's a good point. Like, oh, yeah. So.
And you still let The Rock look strong at the end because here's Triple H on the top of the stage bragging how he just cost The Rock the title. Mick Foley has left the ringside. He's gone, so he's not involved now. All of a sudden, glass shatters, crowd goes nuts, and Austin runs out and feeds Triple H back into the ring so that The Rock could get his heat back. And it's perfect. Everyone gets over. Everyone looks good here. Triple H even gets over by looking like the loser because the heel's plan was foiled, you know? And so spectacular ending to the show. Great way to weave, you know, 3 or 4 storylines together. And like, this is what I mean by like, the ball is rolling now, you know, like you're really like tying things together and you're considering all the characters and how they interact with each other. And it's definitely an ensemble cast as opposed to here's the top of the card and the mid card and the you know the
just the emotion in of those times was like then you'd have like a post-mortem in like Vince's office back there and everyone was coming in, then like Kerwin or the director come in, done whoever, and everyone would just come in and be like, wow, you know what I mean? They just sit there and be like, holy, you know what I mean? Had the same, like everyone's attitude is like, holy smokes. And then, you know, you wouldn't even pick things apart like this didn't work, or, you know, it'd be like, sure, to like nitpick like we did or whatever. You have to be like, well, guess what? You know, out of the 200 things that could have gone wrong, 6 were, you know what I mean? Like, it's always going to be like that. But I have to tell you, the greatest thing after the cameras went down was so unbelievable, which made me really like Triple H. So funny. So, you know, the ending, Triple H is like, and it's also that wonderful old school pantomime, like, I'm not going to drink a beer with me because you're going to do the thing to me. You know what I mean? He's pantomiming with Austin, like, no, Austin's like, cross my heart. You have a beer. And he's like, you cross your heart? No, you're going to give me the thing. He's like, nope. And then, of course, he does it. What you didn't see is like, so after the camera goes down, fucking Austin and Triple H did that same thing no less than 6 fucking times for about 40 minutes. The house lights were on. The crew was like wrapping cables going like, we got to get out of here. 80% of the people were still there. I went back, came back out. Vince is like, where? He's like, they're still out there? Like, because people are like, they're doing stuff and you hear the fucking crowd and you're like, what is going on? They're doing it. And then I remember one guy's going like back to like, you know, they always had a lot of beers at the ready, like, get more beers, more, because Austin's like, throw me more beers, throw me more beers, throw me more beers. He's taking 2. And then like the house and Triple H is doing this stuff like, okay, well, I'm going. And it was kind of a different, they knew like the cameras are down. We can really play with this more. So fucking Triple H is like halfway out of the ring. And he's like, hey, come on again. And he's like, no, you're not. You're going to do it again. Like, no, come on. I swear. Come on. No, you're going to do it again. Then he'd sheepishly get back in. And the crowd's like, yeah. And he's like looking around like these long-winded 5-minute things like, all right, I'll have a beer. Here you go. And then boom. And Austin would get on top of him. And there was just so much beer. And I think Austin got drunk because he's going like so many of them. And he's on top of him, like giving him that business. And, you know, like while Triple H is like there and everyone's going crazy. And then Triple H is rolling out, walking up the aisle. And Austin like, hey, sometimes off the mic, come on back. And Triple H is like, no, you're going to, I swear to you, I wish this was, I wonder if it was on somehow, and I think the cameras were down, so I don't think this is anywhere. And it's so unfortunate. It was just so unbelievably funny. And I knew it was exploding. And there were so many beer cans, and there was people up who couldn't get down on the main floor yelling at me, going like, "Get me one of Austin's beer cans. I'll give you $20." And I just was like, "Well, here, this through, And they're just so to have a crushed beer can, of which there was like a fucking 100 of them, and they just kept going. And by the time they got backstage, so drenched, and then Triple H is just cracking up. They're just like, it wasn't planned. It was like, man, they went on for an extra fucking 30, 40 minutes.
I'm sure they loved having the crowd at the palm of their hands.
It was unbelievable. It was really like people there were like, I saw the most special thing. And I remember just going back out there like, this is, by the third or fourth one, it's just getting so, come on. Just like, no. And all that pantomime, no, you're going to do it again. And then like, boom, spitting beer. And then Austin would get on top of him like extra long and like, and he's like, they're probably just like, oh my God. I mean, it was just unbelievable. Yeah.
Austin, one of the most underrated comedians in entertainment history.
Without a doubt.
The amount of laughs that he's provided for people.
Without a doubt. And just all these subtle things too. Like he'd always catch the beer, and then when the guy threw him the beer, if he missed it, he'd fucking look at the guy like, "You fucking asshole." Like, well, I just threw you the beer the same way every time. You dropped it. And he'd be like, and he just, all the things like that. Like, no, I didn't. It's how you threw it, asshole. Like shit like that. Yeah. Just, to see something dialed in where it's like, oh my God, now it's just like his alter ego. Like you just knew like all the verbiage was going to work no matter what. And even, the contradictions of someone, he would talk so much and he would say like, "You want me to run my mouth and go on and on like this guy?" And it's like, you were going on and on, but it doesn't matter because you're just so like fucking locked in and everything. Yeah. You're just so compelled with everything that he says. Like just the dumb shit too. Like the not the dumb shit, but like things that, what did he say once for me? Like, "Now I know I'm supposed to be scared of you, but I just can't seem to find the fear. I'm not afraid." Like things like that were so like, what's the other guy supposed to do? Like, well, fuck you, be afraid. Just these like subtle, odd things that were like not like typical that he would do. Like, I know I should be scared, but I can't seem to be scared.
The moment I became like a huge fan was he was feuding with Bret Hart, and this is before Bret was even like when Bret was on his sabbatical, and he just had this one promo I remember. "If you put the letter S in front of the word Hitman, you got my exact feelings on Bret Hart."
Yeah. So dumb, so good.
Bless it.
Well,
to me, we're going to be talking a lot about Steve Austin.
Well, I just wanted to say, to me, that was one of the greatest pieces of business, as Jared would say, ever was Bret Hart, Steve Austin, the build up to that. And it was so smart because I remember they had him on like some kind of show or something where they were not in studio. It was just like two of them, chyrons behind. And Austin could obviously talk a lot more like than Bret Hart, but Bret Hart was smart enough to be like, I don't feel compelled to match you mouth to mouth. I'm just going to fucking stew and get a little more fumble mouth and like, all right, keep talking. And it was kind of like you see a bar fight or something like, oh, one guy's yammering and the other guy's almost mush mouth. Doesn't mean the mush mouth guy isn't going to kick ass. It's just the one guy's just fuming, like going, keep talking. And that's what Bret Hart would do. So I'd always say like, that's smart. He doesn't feel need to be like, sometimes wrestlers I think get on and like, well, now I got to say something just as snappy. And then like, oh, you stink. It's like, if you don't have it, just be fucking pissed, be in the moment. And Bret Hart would always do that and be like, ooh, this is a great buildup. And then that match when it was the I Quit, and then Bret Hart, the blood's gushing out of Austin, and Austin like passes out. So Bret Hart wins, but Austin's so tough, you're going to have to kill him before he say I quit. Like that's a piece of business where like, holy shit, both guys came out of it fucking elevated. And it
One
was
of my
like
favorite matches.
It was like a clean finish in the sense that like, yep, You know, in a way, it wasn't like just a disappointing schmoz. It was like, my God, blood was gushing out of him, and he would never quit till he passed out. So he loses, but he comes out of it. I was like, wow, that was, that elevated him right there in my mind. That whole run, both of them,
absolutely, they turned them both, and I think. What was smart is Bret Hart attacked him after, and it's like he's already knocked out. What do you do? You already won the match. Like, and it's interesting because he's justified in the sense that Austin made his life a living hell the last 2 months. You know, he cost him the world title, all this stuff. But in that moment, you have sympathy for this guy who just went through a fight. He's bleeding. He's knocked out, and then they even put Ken Shamrock over because he was the special ref, and he like suplexed Hart to get him off of Austin, and Hart backed off like, oh, I don't want to.
Oh, that's right. I forgot that. Yeah, good piece of business.
Yeah, very good. Well, there's a lot of good pieces of business in the future of Tales from the Attitude Era. And we hope you tune in, and we hope you're enjoying the show. We obviously would love to hear from you. Any feedback, any positive feedback, hate mail, we love it all.
Yeah. Let's change the name of the show to Good Pieces of Business. No? What do you think? Put it in the comments. After you subscribe.
TFT Attitude Era at gmail.com is how you reach us. Also, TFT Attitude Era is our handle on social media. Follow us. We post clips and fun little stuff. We'll be back next week reviewing the SmackDown that follow this with the highly anticipated work rate classic of Fabulous Moolah and Mae Young for the Women's Championship. I'm
look for that laugh.
So
look for Mae Young's forearm tattoo for an extra treat. Try to decide what it is.
We'll see you next week, folks.